WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. I am in the midst of what's going to be one of my favorite weeks of radio of my lifetime, in basking in the afterglow. I don't know if I'm going to jump in a fountain with the Stanley Cup when it comes to Baltimore, but I'm probably going to do something probably crazy and that I didn't get to do the first night. This guy runs around with the Stanley Cup every year. He covers the National Hockey League as a senior writer at NHL.com. Oh, he's seen them all, the Blackhawks, the Kings, all these teams running around and hoisting the goblet. Dan, is this Capitals thing different in some way? I saw Steve Levy and Barry Melrose almost sort of emotional in the afterglow when I was in my hotel room in Vegas. I saw a lot of emotional people on the ice. Obviously, I was a part of that, and you and I have gotten to know each other a little bit through this run. Was this thing different than the rest of them?
Well, I think so, because what you're seeing is pure, what you're seeing is what we saw from Alex Ovechkin throughout the playoffs, certainly in the final, is just pure emotion. And now it's a recency bias. We look and we say, oh, look what these guys are doing. Nobody's partied like this before. And that's not true. I mean, teams have done terrific things and really, just enjoyed it and whatnot. But the thing to me that stands out with what the Capitals have done throughout this entire run, and certainly since they've won, is they've shared it with their fans. They're out in the public. They're celebrating with the people. Even that night when they won the Cup, they're carrying it through the casino. I mean, they're not taking back entrances, underground lots to avoid the public and, the crazy crowd or whatever it may be. They're walking it right through the fans, and they're celebrating with their fans. And there was a lot of fans, a lot of Capitals fans, as you well know, in Washington for Game 5. A lot of them were hanging out well after the game was over, watching the celebration on the ice.
Well, that was a hell of a thing unto itself, right? Like, you and I have talked about if it had been Winnipeg, right? And by the way, Trotz has admitted to me in his darker moments that Winnipeg would have been different. Like Winnipeg sort of worried everybody, I think, and that they didn't play well, and that changed everything. But the ability to get to Vegas and the fact that they sold their tickets off, let's call it what it was, in a Game 5 scenario, that is so unique to have 5. I mean, by the way, 20 years ago, and I don't know if you were there, Dan, but I was there when Detroit danced the Cup around D.C. in a 4-game sweep, and there might have been 10,000 Red Wings fans in the rink in D.C. in '98. Sure. So this was a little bit of a turnabout fair play, but that's not a normal occurrence, what happened with the Caps fans.
It isn't, but let's not forget. I mean, there were a lot. It was the majority of the fans in the building were Vegas fans. I mean, it was obviously much louder for them, but there were a lot of Caps fans, and that's one of the things about it being in Las Vegas is it's a destination city. If you're going to get a chance to go to Las Vegas, and you're going to go, and the opportunity presents itself for you to go to Vegas and to see your team potentially win the Stanley Cup for the first time ever, I mean, why wouldn't you do it if you had the wherewithal to do it, if you had the money and the ability to do it? And obviously these fans did. And, you're going to get it to go to Vegas, to celebrate. I mean, what a wonderful place to do it. What a place to win the Stanley Cup, by the way, too. But I just love how they're out in with the fans. Their fans have been longtime suffering fans, too. They've lived through the heartache, maybe more than some of the players have.
Oh, I remember LaFontaine, dude. I promise you, Ovechkin has no association with that at all.
No, absolutely not. So these fans who have been generational fans, I mean, they've lived through it all. So the fact that they're getting a taste of this celebration, too, and being a part of it, that's what I love the most, and that is why I think it is. Maybe it's a recency bias, I'm not sure, but it's a unique thing because what you're seeing is nothing behind closed doors, everything out in the public. It's also the time we live in now with social media, and it gets out there and it goes viral and whatnot. And even you have Ovechkin's wife, tweeting him, Instagramming things from him, sleeping with the Stanley Cup, whatever it may be. But that's great. Fans want to see that. They want to be a part of that.
He is Dan Rosen. He's with NHL.com, and no one covering the league in a finer fashion. D. Rosen, NHL, the way to find him. There's a lot of spokes here, right? And I've talked to Ted Starkey. Hey, you're going to write a book, and where would you begin to write the book? what a storybook story all the way around, including beating McVee in the end, including beating Fleury in the end, including marching the Cup into Vegas casinos in the end, including the story for the league and your employer and what this Vegas franchise now represents, which is a strong franchise, not just an expansion franchise, a strong franchise. All of that happens, but really the biggest star in the game and this guy who's been a transcendent player and a Russian player in a time of sort of political upheaval, all this going on, Washington, D.C., the parade going right in front of Trump with a Russian on the front holding the Stanley Cup. It's a wild story all the way around, but Ovechkin's got to be where this thing begins, I guess, and the roots of Ovechkin, because none of this happens without the Great Eight.
No, I mean, he's the beginning and the end of this whole Washington Capitals Stanley Cup story. I mean, he's the guy who brought hope to the organization 13 years ago when he was a rookie, and he also was a big part of all the heartbreak through the years of being terrific in the regular season and unable to get past it. He wasn't the problem. I think that's where the narrative turns. Is he wasn't the issue. He was still producing. He was still the guy that was getting the job done. The problem was he wasn't making other players better. He wasn't carrying his team along, and that's what makes, to me, that's the difference between what makes a guy an elite player and what makes him a champion. I've long felt that Alex Ovechkin is one of the all-time great players in the league, with or without a Stanley Cup, because of the fact that he is great. I mean, everything he does is terrific on an individual basis, but what he did this year is he brought everybody along for the ride with him. He carried that team at times. And I know Evgeny Kuznetsov was terrific. Backstrom was terrific. Carlson, Holtby. You go on down the list, right, of guys, Smith, Pelly, Beagle, Eller, Oshie. You can go on down the list of guys who played terrific during this entire run, but they're dragged. They got a little extra drag, and they got pulled into the fight a little bit more by Ovechkin, and we have not seen that from him in the past. He did it this year, and it's no coincidence that he wins the Stanley Cup, and it solidifies his legacy. To me, his legacy was already an all-time great, but you can't make the argument that he's not now. It solidifies his legacy.
Well, I think it was easy for anyone on the outside to put the TV on and fall in love with any variety of these players for any variety of reasons, right? There's the Tom Wilson bad guy role. There's the associate actor in Backstrom who may be the best player on the team, the most gifted guy who played through this incredible injury, through all of this stuff. Kuznetsov, sort of the forgotten guy, and the guy who was always that great young hope that he flourished. All of these young players, whether it was Orlov or Hughes or guys that stepped up and played better. Devontae Smith-Pelly finding himself in all of this. Lars Eller playing a leading role when he's been a supporting character. All of this is sort of normal Stanley Cup fare, is it not? And including the goalie who was the brick wall and the savior and all of this, who made the miraculous save. You see this almost every year, though, when you win a Stanley Cup and win these 16 games, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because you win and lose as a team. I mean, this is the ultimate team sport, and that's how you got to get it done. I mean, the Pittsburgh Penguins don't win the Stanley Cup 2 years ago without a guy like Tom Kuhnhackl playing the role that he played, or Brian Rust or Connor Sherry, or the
guys whose names will be long forgotten, except if you were watching the Penguins game that night.
Yeah, or those guys. I mean, Rust and Sherry are still around.
Fair enough.
They're all still around, but what they did in championship times, it will never be forgotten. And these are those are the guys that get it done. Devontae Smith-Pelly will never be forgotten in Washington. If he never plays another game for the Washington Capitals, he will be a big part of Washington Capitals history. He scored a game-tying goal in a Stanley Cup clinching goal in a game in the third period. He scored 7 goals in 24 games in the playoffs. I mean, he'll never be forgotten. Jay Beagle will never be forgotten. These are the guys. You need guys like this to step up and play a huge role. Lars Eller, for what he was able to do, stepping into Backstrom's role for a couple of games when Backstrom was hurt. stepping back out into his third-line role, stepping back in when Kuznetsov got hurt in Game 2, stepping back into his third-line role. Just that versatility to be able to do that. Brooks Orpik was terrific in the playoffs. He gets killed left and right, but he was good in the playoffs, right? They'll never be forgotten. You need these types of players to step out and almost play out of character at times to get yourself over the hump, and that's what the Capitals got. They got guys who did more than they had ever done before.
Dan Rosen is our guest. He is D. Rosen, NHL, at NHL.com. All of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast, a tasty coffee, the best fried chicken in the land. Make sure you're using the app when you're pumping the gas. You'll get your fried chicken and your Western fries for free at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Also, the Maryland Jockey Club and our Laurel entries now in the WNST morning newspaper, as well as on the front of WNST.net, and a Triple Crown winner. And I'll get to that with Eddie Olczyk later. But for now, it's Dan Rosen. We're talking hockey. Trotz, and, where all this stands. And, I'm too close to this. I'm sitting there in the aftermath, and Ovechkin just drops the cup off in front of me on the table with Trotz, and we're having fun and, eating fresh salmon, looking out on the strip and thinking, well, this is kind of a fun night. This is kind of neat. And it occurred to me the whole time, well, there's McClellan over there, and Trotz is kind of unemployed over here. And I don't know how this is going to go down, and I know it's probably going to go down quickly, hopefully in the next couple of days or certainly by the end of the week, one way or another, but this is a little awkward, right, Dan?
Well, it is. It is certainly a little different from what we've seen in the past, but I liked how both guys reacted on the ice after winning the Stanley Cup. Now, you're in the elation of winning the Stanley Cup. You might say anything, but these are two pretty measured guys, and they know their positions. Barry Trotz said that he told Brian McClellan, give me a few days. I want a few days to enjoy this if we win it. And this was before they won it, is when he told them. But there's no place he'd rather be but Washington. Brian McClellan said, look, we just won the Stanley Cup. His contract is up July 1st. If he wants to be back, he'll be back. Now, they got to get it done. And here's where the rub comes in. Before winning the Stanley Cup, it was on the Capitals' terms if they were going to get it done. Now that they've won the Stanley Cup, it's on Barry Trotz's terms if we want to get it done. Barry Trotz is the one who's going to say, well, I see what that guy's making, and I see what that guy's making, and they also won the Stanley Cup. I want a little bit more. What
are we talking about here? Give everybody some parameters, because I don't know. I think most people are pretty familiar with what NFL coaches make, $6, $7, $8, $9 million. They're also familiar that Buck Showalter doesn't make what Manny Machado is going to make or what Chris Davis has gotten. And, in our baseball vernacular here, I think we lose touch of what the NHL salary cap, and you live and swim in that world. And I think a lot of the fans now, quite frankly, this is an incredible education time for fans to say, well, what does constitute the salary cap? And what happens to Carlson? Because most, casual hockey fans don't think about a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, the coach is not under the cap. It has nothing to do. The coach is completely separate from the cap, so he can get paid whatever. I think ballparking it, you're probably looking somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $4.5 million for Barry Trotz, which would be which would probably be a pay raise for him. Maybe 2.5 to 4, somewhere in that neighborhood per year on a 4 or 5 year contract, if that's where he wants to go. That's probably where you're ballparking it for him. That number may never come out publicly because coaches' contracts don't have to be. Coaches' contracts are very rarely made public. But I would think that's sort of where you are now. If you're looking at the player, John Carlson, he could be looking in the neighborhood of a 7 to 8 year deal at around $7 million. Per year. So you got to think, you look at this Capital salary cap.
Well, they've already laid out on Kuznetsov and obviously on Oshie as well, right? So they've
gotten Kuznetsov, Oshie, obviously Ovechkin, Holtby. So there's a number of deals in Backstrom, who, by the way, I think only has one more year left on his deal. So you're looking, you have to not just look at this season coming up. You have to look down the road, how it's going to affect. Who do you have coming up on an entry-level deal that might have to get a bump from that? Who's getting paid next type of deals. So it's the cap is just this gigantic puzzle that's, they pay guys in front offices just to do the salary cap because it's just a massive puzzle of how to figure out where all this allocation goes, and it's not just a straight, well, this guy makes this and this guy makes this. It's various. There's so many degrees on what the cap, so many tangents that go off from the cap that it's hard to predict. But basically, I think if the Capitals are going to get John Carlson re-signed, I think somebody's going to have to go. And I don't know who that is going to be. If they really want Carlson back, it's going to have to, in order to be able to stay within the means of the cap, not put yourself in too much trouble and give yourself a chance to fill out the rest of your roster, you're going to have to, somebody's going to probably have to go. Now, Jay Beagle might be a guy that's no longer there anymore. He's an unrestricted free agent. At the, July 1st, he becomes an unrestricted free agent. His next contract might be too rich for the Capitals' blood because they basically could say, well, I don't know that he's going to get any better than he was, and these people are going to give him a bigger raise from what we were giving him. We can't allocate that to Jay Beagle. We got to find somebody who can do what Jay Beagle does, but do it at a cheaper
Well, once
rate,
your name goes on the cup, you have that shine about you. Your value goes up 20%. And maybe more than that. Certainly, that's been the case across every sport, right? Like, that guy was part of a winner. We need him in our soup here. We need to have one of those guys.
Absolutely. That guy was part of a winner. He played big when it mattered. You could see his role, exactly what he did well. We can put him in there. Doesn't always work that way, though. Doesn't always work the next place you go, that it works as well as where you just work. That's the thing that people forget about. And, like a Jay Beagle is a perfect example. Like, his role in Washington is perfect. He's a fourth-line center, penalty killer, face-off guy, defensive-oriented, but he can play the type of style that they want to play. He could go somewhere else, and they could try to play him in the exact same role, but the style is different. The line mates are different. The way they want to play is different. How they roll their lines are different. All these things are different, and it may not work for him. He just may not be as effective. Devontae Smith-Pelly before the playoffs probably wasn't coming back to Washington, and nobody would have cared, right? 7 goals in 75 games in the regular season. Now he just scored 7 in 24 games and won each in the last 3 games of the Stanley Cup final. Now people are like, oh my God, we can't live without Devontae Smith-Pelly. But that's not the truth, because you got to go back and look at the regular season too, and you say to yourself, hey, if this guy's going to want a bigger salary than we're willing to offer at that position, you allocate for that position, we got to find somebody else who could do that job and maybe do it as well or better than Devontae Smith-Pelly. It's the hard truth. You got to be shrewd when you're a general manager at this time of year. Guys who you just won with, who you celebrated with, who you blood, sweat, and tears came from for you, for that team, who you hugged and will never forget that time, they're not going to be playing somewhere else next year, and you're going to have to let them go.
Well, and that has been a reality for anybody who's been a Ravens fan around here. I've been very familiar with that. Dan Rosen is our guest. He is D. Rosen, NHL, out on Twitter. A great follow if you love the good old hockey game, because it's the best game you can name. And we've certainly had a lot of fun with this around here, and I think a lot of folks wonder where all of this goes, and I think you've done a great job of resetting that. But long-term, I don't think this organization's in much different shape than they were this time last year, which was, I didn't think the bleeding was as bad in the offseason as everybody thought. I don't think you need to be the absolute best team. I think you need to have all those elements of a goalie you believe in, and second and third line players you believe in, and star players, and a penalty kill, and good coaching and all of that. But you also need some good luck and some good fortune. The Caps had good luck and some bad luck along the way. But moving forward, I look at them and say they got a lot of really good hockey players. They got a couple of Hall of Fame hockey players, a couple of Hall of pretty good, a solid coach, and that would be the same if Trotz goes and coaches out in Minnesota, or takes a year off, or Reardon takes over, whatever. I don't think the organization's in bad shape here over the next 3 or 4 years that they're going to wind up in that awful spot of being a 75-point team in 2020, let's say.
No, they're in a good spot, and I think one of the things that puts them in a good spot, and you touched on it earlier, is they've got some contract certainty with a lot of their players. Now, they don't have it, with John Carlson, and Nick Backstrom's got another year. I think it's a year left for Nick. I'm not.
They also have no turds.
Sure.
They have no turd contracts, right?
What do you mean by that?
They have nothing that's awful that they wish they didn't have.
Oh, no.
I mean, I'm an Orioles fan, Dan. We got Chris Davis.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand. No, they're in a good spot. They have contract certainty with core players that are an important part of this team, obviously, and they know some of the guys, and now they've gotten a taste. They see what Avrana can do and a Stevenson. They know that Tom Wilson can play a bigger role than he had played in previous seasons, right? They saw Christian Juice play a third pair role. Now, he wasn't terrific. He didn't do anything special, but he wasn't a bad player. He didn't get burned. You found certain things about it. You saw Niskanen and Orlov, and you say, okay, we've got ourselves a top pair. I mean, really, when you think about it, that's a top pair. They're a shutdown pair. They're terrific. So they're in a very good position. Their goaltender obviously is set. Makes him, pretty good money, but he's set. What is going to happen with some of the holes that they're going to have to fill? If they can't bring back Smith-Pelly, what's going to happen there? If they can't bring back Beagle, what's going to happen there? Carlson's a big loss if they can't bring him back. So how do they replace that, right? Backup goaltender. Odds are Philip Grubauer is getting traded at the offseason because I believe he's a restricted free agent. And why would he, he's going to want him more. And he can be a starter somewhere else, and they might be able to get something for him. So you got to go do that, right? So there's certain things, the holes they're going to have to fill, which are no different than any team that wins the Stanley Cup. But they're in a good position. I'm not going to sit here and say that they'll win it again next year, but they're in a good position to compete for it again next year. There's no doubt.
Dan Rosen is here. All things NHL as we now get into the offseason and all the business of the post-celebration. And we're trying to gauge this Capitals' future as well as where we are. A heck of a story for someone, right? Like a real storybook season for the league itself and the way this whole thing is played out in the nation's capital, including a parade going past the Washington Monument. A really nice bow on a season for the league.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? It was a terrific year in many respects for the National Hockey League. The Vegas story trumps all. If you look from beginning to end, that Vegas story is unbelievable. It really is. It's just
because you were sitting out there 18 months ago and saying, boy, I hope we don't have another Arizona franchise here. I hope this isn't bad. I hope it's not too bad. I hope people care. Oh, my God, the Raiders are coming. They're going to get overshadowed. Wow, of all the things that could have happened and then the tragedy in October, it really is an incredible story for the league.
The revisionist history that went on during the playoffs about Vegas was pretty remarkable. When you consider roughly a year ago, in about a week it'll be a year ago, we were in Vegas at the expansion draft, and I don't recall anybody in Vegas at the expansion draft or any time after the expansion draft when that roster was set to start the season where people were saying, hey man, this could be a real good team. This could be a playoff team. Nobody was saying that. Not a single person was saying that. They were saying, this team could be competitive. This team looks like it can compete, but it's not going to be very good, and there's this, that, and the other. Well, and all of a sudden, come playoff time, people were like, well, I knew it all along. No, nobody knew it all along, right? But the story is amazing. It's a storybook. It's a fairy tale. It's unbelievable. The book that can be written about the Vegas Golden Knights story would be, it'd be just an unbelievable, nuanced story of how this all came about, especially with the tragedy on October 1st in Vegas, too, with the shooting there. But it was a great season for the National Hockey League, and I think the finish of having the Capitals get it done, having of Alex Ovechkin finally get it done, that puts a nice bow on this season, because I think a lot of people were wondering, is this ever gonna happen for him? He's a generational star. He's been a face of the league with Sidney Crosby for more than a decade. Is it ever going to happen for him, or is he just going to be the guy who finished his career without the Stanley Cup championship, and that will forever follow him? Well, he didn't just get the championship. He got the Conn Smythe Trophy, too. And so that narrative is now dead, and I think that's great for the league because it's another guy who checks it off, so maybe we'll have another one check it off next year, too, right?
Dan Rosen is our guest, and we'll stay in touch with him as we continue now to probably care a whole lot more about hockey around here, Dan. So the bad news is you might have to get stuck talking to me like in October and December and different off months. Take care of yourself. You've been a wealth of information and a great chemo-sabi to ride shotgun around, as well as all of the NHL media. It was really fun taking a peek behind the curtain and watching it all unfold the last couple of weeks from the desert out to D.C. Quite a show we all put on, huh?
Well, great. Stay in touch, all right, man?
You got it. Dan Rosen, D. Rosen, NHL. The way to find him out on Twitter as well as anywhere at NHL.com. You can find me out on the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper delivers to your email inbox at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. It's always $10 a month at Planet Fitness. There's one right around the corner from you, and spring has sprung. They're always judgment-free. Get inside, get yourself in great shape, stay alive. Breathe in that fresh air of a Stanley Cup champion. Planet Fitness at PlanetFitness.com. They sponsor our morning newspaper, as does the Maryland Jockey Club. And the entries for Laurel this weekend. Get down to Laurel and step inside the air conditioning confines down there. Bet the ponies. They have a lovely new club space down there and sports bar. You want to check it out at Laurel. The entries on the front of WNST.net as well as in our morning newspaper. Any breaking news happens first on the WNST text service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday giving his post-Stanley Cup stories, and I'll be chatting with him this week as well. Coons Ford, Security Boulevard sponsors our our text service as well as the afternoon show from 3 until 5, and 3 until 5, it is the SSV on WNST. That's Thursday. All right. Too much cup for me. I am Nestor. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming everywhere around the world on our mobile device. We are WNST.net at AM 1570, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.